Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ali and here I just talk to myself about books and then someone, maybe you may or may not watch this at a later date. Recently I read, well actually in August and September I read a total of 21 I think books, and I definitely forgot to film a wrap up, so let me tell you all about them now. So the first book I read in August was Last Night in Montreal by Emily St. John Mandel. I picked this up when I was in Canada because we'd been to Montreal and I wanted a book that would 100% remind me of my trip there. So I thought, why not pick this up? It literally says Montreal in the title. So I did, not knowing anything about it, but knowing that I loved Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel and that I love the writing. Now this is completely different in terms of genre. Like, that was more like speculative sci-fi type fiction, a bit of magical realism. This is just like fiction. I don't really know how else to put it, like contemporary fiction. So in this book we follow Lilia, who was abducted by her own father as a child and has been on the run ever since with him. We also follow another character who is Eli, her latest boyfriend.
That's a lovely accent you have.
So we do have a few different timelines, but he's her latest boyfriend and one day she just disappears, so he goes on the search for her. And then we follow another character, Christopher, who is the detective in charge for finding Lilia in the first place, back when she was a child and was abducted. So we have this like trio of characters. There's also another character, but I won't spoil too much who she is, but we have this trio of characters whose stories kind of like converge at some point, and it's really interesting to see how they come together. I obviously found that I adored Emily St. John Mandel's writing. However, I wouldn't say that I found this book as good as Sea of Tranquility. Sea of Tranquility I gave 5 stars. I thought it was one of like my best reads of that year, whenever that was. But this one I think I gave 4 stars too, just because it was a little like too much slice of life for me, I think. I don't really know how else to put it really, but also I absolutely detested Eli.
God, I hate him.
And it's not in the case of like, again, I've said a million times before that I love books that have unlikable characters when it's by design. When you're meant to enjoy a character or think they're fine and you hate them, then I don't like it. And I really didn't like his character at all. So that kind of like made the book less interesting for me. But overall, it was still a really good read. Love the writing, and I would recommend if you're wanting to try Emily St. John Mandel, but maybe you're not into kind of like sci-fi or speculative fiction. Next, I read the first of a trio of books I'm going to cover in this wrap up that are kind of like similarly themed, but this is Rose in Chains by Julie Soto. This is based on a Dramione fanfic called The Auction, and I hadn't read that yet. It was on my list to read. Obviously I have the same feelings everyone else does about the original author of the original work.
She is the worst. She is the worst person.
I do, however, have different feelings about fan fiction, and especially when they've kind of changed the entire world, the entire magic system, the entire like personality of the characters to publish it traditionally. I don't necessarily see an issue with it. So Rose in Chains follows Bryony. Bryony's brother was prophesized to unite the realms, which is currently kind of like warring. However, he has been murdered and she is the last surviving descendant of that line. The forces of this like dark force called Beaumard have won, and everyone that's kind of on the other side has been captured and the women are being auctioned off. And because of who she is, Bryony is like the most coveted possession. So she ends up being auctioned off to the highest bidder, and the winner ends up being Tovin Hurst, who is a high-ranking Beaumard soldier and her old school crush, even though they never really had anything in common or were never really like friends or anything when they were younger. They've always been kind of like rivals slash enemies, academic rivals as well in some cases. And so that's kind of where it starts off. It is dark, there are definitely some trigger warnings to check out. However, the first thing I will say is if I didn't know that this was based on fanfic, I wouldn't be able to tell. It's completely different. Like, the whole premise of good versus evil has always been a thing prior to the original work that the fanfic had been based on. That's nothing new. The world has changed, the magic system has changed, the characters are different, the whole enemies to lovers with darkness, dark romance vibes, that's nothing new. So I think if I hadn't known that this was based on fanfic, I would never be able to tell, and I do therefore recommend it as kind of like its own, stop comparing it to the fanfic type reading. I will say it was a dark romantasy, so this one was definitely more focused on the romance aspects, and as such the kind of like romance side of it was a little bit toxic just because of like the situation that they were put in, but equally I did enjoy it overall. I still quite liked it. I think overall I gave this book a 4-star rating. What I quite liked about this book was the magic system in itself. So there are two kind of different magic systems, or like types of magic in this world. So there is mind magic and then there is heart magic. Now in terms of heart magic, you have to utilize a familiar and it does drain you, so that's kind of like a taboo type of magic, which is what the people of Beaumont are using. And then the others, like the rebellion, I guess, or the people that are trying to survive, like Brownie, utilize mind magic, which is the like higher status magic, let's call it, the better thought magic, so not like taboo or dark. And I did like kind of how that developed and how that was described throughout the book. The world was quite interesting. In terms of the romance, it was slow burn and it was done really, really well. Now I'm a sucker for slow burn. I hate like insta love and insta lust, and this one was done pretty well. Like, the tension between the characters was good. It took a while to like build up. You definitely believed the like enemies, rivals aspects of it first, whereas sometimes it's like they were never really enemies to begin with. It's literally just like lust to lovers. So in this case I really liked this. This edition is the Fairy Loot one, and I have to say I'm not a fan of the colour scheme. However, the naked hardback and the end paper art is to die for. It is so, so beautiful. I'm obsessed with it. But I just have a thing for like dusky red and grey as a combo. I don't like it. So I didn't like the colour scheme, but I did love the art. Like, literally, if just had just been different colours, I would love it. I would recommend that book, but definitely check out the trigger warnings for that one. Next book I read was The Treachery of Swans. I no longer have my copy because I ended up selling it, as I ended up giving this book a 3-star, and I didn't really want a special edition of it. It wasn't kind of like good enough for me to keep a special edition of it. I was really excited about this book. So this is supposedly like a retelling of Swan Lake, a sapphic retelling of Swan Lake. So in terms of like the premise, it had everything going for it. I love Swan Lake, I love sapphic romance. You know, it was there, it was gonna be good. However, the execution wasn't great. So in this book, we follow Odile, who has spent years being prepared by her adoptive father to carry out this like heist of a lifetime, in which she will need to like befriend the princess and also take her place. The end game is to restore the magic that was outlawed in the kingdom in order to allow her father to kind of have his powers again. So yeah, she kind of takes the place of the princess, who is Marie Dodette, and she soon realizes that it isn't enough for her just to impersonate the princess. She's gonna actually need her help to be able to accomplish what she needs to. So as I said, I was very excited for this book, but the execution just wasn't great. Like, the characters were really superficial. I didn't believe any of like the romance subplots. It just wasn't, it didn't add anything to the story. There was like a couple, so there was obviously the main 2 characters, that kind of romance there, and then there was also 2 background characters. I just didn't think it added anything to it, so it almost was like shouldn't have been there in the first place, because it did nothing to progress the story. It didn't make me feel more engaged with the characters. It was just mid, so to put it. And then also it's a standalone book. However, the way it had been paced at the beginning was a lot slower, and it almost felt like it was gearing up for a cliffhanger. However, at the end you get this very, very rushed flash forward chapter that like resolves everything, or supposedly resolves everything, and I hated it. I absolutely hated that ending. Like, it just felt so rushed and almost like an afterthought. Like, this was meant to be a series, but then at the last minute they decided not to make it into a series and therefore just added like a random chapter at the end to tie it up, loose knots. So for that reason, I gave it 3 stars because like the premise was interesting, but it just wasn't well executed. And now thinking about it, do I want to give it a lower rating? Possibly. Maybe 2.5 stars. I don't know. Next, and you will see the theme now, I read The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy by Bridget Knightley. This edition is everything. Look at it. This art, I am speechless. I absolutely love it. This is the Illumicrate edition. I am obsessed. I love them. I love them so much. So again, this isn't based on fanfic. However, the author has written fanfic before, and I mean, if you kind of look at the characters, maybe there was some inspiration there. However, again, completely different world, completely different magic system, completely different vibes. I loved it. This was hilarious. Like, I could not put it down. So in this book, we follow Osric, who is a member, the Iron Order of Assassins. He gets paid extortionate amounts of money to dispatch people from this world, and he's very, very good at it. However, his whole life is now in danger, as is Seath, which is like the magic system, so like runs through your veins and stuff, begins to rot. So he's got something that's causing like the rotting of his internal magic system, which means he will either pass away or he will lose his magic entirely, which might as well mean a death sentence in his case, because that's exactly what's going to happen when the Order find out. So in a cruel twist of fate, the only person who can help him is Orion Ferren, I can't remember what her name is. Orion, who is like his total opposite. She's really good. She heals people for a living. Like, you know, she is literally like the complete polar opposite of him. They end up meeting and finding out that there is like a mutual interest in terms of like, she also needs help with something. She needs funding to stop the deadly spread of this disease that is killing a lot of children, and he has a lot of money. So they decide to strike up a bargain whereby he will fund that research and she will help work out how to heal him, which is no small feat. Now, again, I absolutely loved it. This book had like no business being as funny as it was. It was just so like and I hate using the word banter, but the banter between the characters was hilarious. The slow burn again was so good. Like, I don't think anything spicy happens, but like the tension in this book was just brilliant, and I absolutely adored it. Saying that, like, the world building and side characters could maybe have been better developed. However, this is the first in a series, so maybe this was kind of setting up our main characters, and then we'll get more as we go forward in the series. However, overall, I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, but I would say it was a completely different vibe to Rose in Chains. So yeah, I cannot wait for a sequel to this because it was just so funny. Like, one of the funniest books I've read recently, I would say. And next I read one of my favourite series of the year, possibly ever, and that was Red Rising, the first trilogy. I do have the second trilogy here that I have yet to read. I will read it soon, but until then it is banished backwards. So yes, so that is Red Rising, Golden Sun and Morning Star by Pierce Brown. I was so pleasantly surprised with this. Now, this was mega hyped everywhere, and I was a little skeptical because, one, I'm not the biggest fan of sci-fi. Well, I actually saying that, I keep saying that, and then I read books and I love them. But I've never historically been the biggest fan of sci-fi set in space. I've not minded stuff that's like set in different worlds and the world's entirely like built up, etc. But I've never really like been a huge fan of space set sci-fi. And also, I was just worried it was one of those books that had just been like massively overhyped, like some that we will come to shortly. But I absolutely adored this. Like, I am obsessed. I am obsessed with this series. I'm obsessed with these characters.
Why are you so obsessed with me?
I have cried, I have laughed, I have pulled my hair out in stress because of what's happening, and I loved every minute of it. So I think I gave them like about an average of 4 stars in total, maybe 4.5 stars. I think the first one I gave like 3.75. The second one I gave 5 stars. So this one, yeah. So this one, Red Rising, I gave 3.75 stars. Golden Sun I gave 5 stars to. And no, sorry, 4.75 stars. And Morning Star I gave 5 stars to, because I don't know, just progressively got better and better and better. Like, I think the first one was a little bit slow because it was like set in the scene, the characters were a lot younger, it like almost was a bit of like a Hunger Games in space vibe. And then as the characters developed and the story went on, it got so much deeper, and my heart could not take it. But anyway, so in this world we follow a color-coded caste society where essentially like gold are at the top, you got loads of different colors in between, and then red are at the bottom. So they're like the lowest rung in the ladder, and they have to do the manual dirty work essentially, which in this case is mining on Mars to make the surface of the planet habitable for the future. However, what they don't know is that people have actually been living on the planet already, and they've just been utilized as like workhorses essentially to keep doing what needed to be done without ever receiving any reward for it. And when this is figured out, we follow Darrow and his wife Io, and they decide to spend a night under the stars, and that ends up leading to like the worst punishment imaginable. And it kind of sets off a train of events that leads to a somewhat revolution, but an undercover one. So Darrow ends up going undercover inside the academy, where golds are like trained to become like better soldiers and leaders, etc. And his whole plan is to take them down from within. So he's part of this rebellion that is slowly building up across the other coloured worlds, but most predominantly within the red world. And yeah, it's just the political twists, the character development, it's funny in places, it's heartbreaking in others. Like, this book has everything you could ever possibly want, and it took me on such a journey, and I cannot wait to continue it. But I did need to take a little bit of a break before I continue the next trilogy. I also have a ton of books I said I would read in October and November, and spoiler alert, I've read like 2 so far. So there we are. But I am definitely high priority wanting to finish this before the end of the year, so reading books 4, 5 and 6, and I can't wait. But this is worth the hype, and I would recommend it. My dog's sat behind me, and someone's just driven up like blasting out Golden by Huntrix from K-pop Demon Hunters.
Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!
Yeah! And I think he thinks it's me, even though I'm sat literally right in front of him. Hello. Hello. I'm here. Because that is definitely something that I would do. It's very me coded. So I think he thinks that I've come home, but I'm actually here. Bless his soul. He is a single brain cell organism, but I love him. I love him so much. Anyway, next I read, nobody hate me for this, When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. Now, my friend gave me this edition because she ended up getting a special edition and has been begging me to read it for so long. Eventually I did. I was very reluctant at the time when it first came out because it was so overhyped, and I had seen so many mixed reviews of it that I was like, I don't know. And also I didn't want the hype to kind of like make me look forward to it too much, and then like I wouldn't enjoy it even less. What can I say about this? It is overhyped in my opinion. I didn't like it as much as my friend did. I'm sorry if you're watching this. I know you love it.
I'm sorry.
And for good reason, I'm sure. It's just maybe not what I expected. So in this book, we follow Rave. Rave is an assassin, essentially. Again, she gets paid to kill people, and she tries to, like, also on the side kill those who she deems are, like, the scourge of society, like, you know, bad men who do bad things, and her boss lets her do it because she's like so powerful, and, you know, he needs to keep her sweet. So in her spare time from being an assassin, she hunts those who like prey on others and dispatches them away from this world. However, she finds herself in the clutches of a bounty hunter. She is taken to the Guild of Nobles, and her fate is decided that she must be executed by dragons. And parallel to this, we also follow another character called Khan, who's been looking for his long lost love for a lot of years, and also wants to like find a way to avenge her and fill the void inside himself that her death or disappearance caused. So he kind of travels the world and ends up coming across Rave whilst she's in prison awaiting trial, and decides to maybe change the plans in place for Rave's ending, because a revelation leads to like his entire world shattering. So there's that. In this world, we've also got like a weird magic system, I think, where they can control like elements. So it's a little bit like Avatar, but some of them can control like different types of elements, and those that can't have like an piercing or like a hole in their ear or something, like a punched hole in their ear. And Rave's got one, but she does actually have the power to control wind, and also another secret power that will not divulge. So she's actually more powerful than anyone believes her to be, and she utilizes that to her advantage. One, to help her during her daily jobs, but also now that she's in danger, to kind of like escape. So there's that. Right, what didn't I like about this book? The first 3/4 of this book were just slow and boring, and like nothing happened for me. The last quarter, I'll tell you what, was really good, and it did pick up, and I am intrigued to read the sequel now because I need to know what happens, and it's only a duology, so whatever, I will make the effort. But the beginning just took so long. Like, the world was confusing, the magic system was confusing. I still don't really get it. I'm not watching videos to try and understand the world. I am not reading a 500-page glossary at the beginning of the book to try and understand it either.
No, thank you, though.
Like, you should be able to describe it well enough that you can understand it by reading the actual story itself, and I didn't feel like that's what's happened. And I'm definitely not one to be reading like really long glossaries. I'm sorry, like that information will go in one ear and out the other, unless it's embedded within the story. Now, if you're utilizing it as kind of like, I don't know, a family tree or whatever to refer back to, fine. But if you are relying on that to help you build your world and magic system and character development, girl, you're not here for me. Also, the other thing is, I hate when books use dragons as just like a plot device. Now, in this case, dragons were very much just like taxis. So they were not characters in the way I wanted them to be. They weren't as important as I wanted them to be. So when you were expected to kind of like feel a certain way towards some of them, I just didn't feel anything towards anyone in this story, which is sad. However, having said that, the last quarter was insane, and I did quite like the character of Khan, so I will be reading the sequel. However, as you may have seen in a previous video, I am getting rid of this copy because it takes up too much space being a hardcover, and I definitely don't think I enjoyed it enough to warrant keeping it in hardcover. So that will go back on my unhaul pile to go to charity shop. And yeah, I think overall I gave this like 3 stars, and that was kind of generous because of the ending. However, I do see why people enjoyed it, and yeah, I'm not going to trash it too much. Next is a book that is in my on-haul pile, but I forgot to get it out, and it's like right at the bottom, so I will not be doing that. And that is Those Bones Are Not My Child. I actually ended up DNFing this book about halfway through. I just couldn't read it anymore, and I felt really, really bad because the topic was actually really important and really interesting. So it's kind of set in the 80s during a time where like children from poor neighborhoods, predominantly poor black neighborhoods, were disappearing. The police didn't really take it seriously, and it talks a lot about kind of like race, criminality, the way that like lower socioeconomic level societies were treated by the police compared to like, you know, your white middle class. And in terms of that, I really, really wanted to enjoy it, but I just couldn't read it. It was like partially true crime, partially like fictionalized, but it was just almost felt unedited. And I ended up finding out that the author actually passed away prior to being able to edit the book, and that it was then edited by a close friend of hers who was also an author. And I think because it wasn't that author's original work, they maybe didn't want to cut out as much as needed to be cut out, and it just felt really, really like wordy and drawn out in certain situations. And honestly, the story is a bit all over the place. As I said, it felt a bit like true crime, a bit like fictionalized, but it didn't really have a clear identity, and I just couldn't follow it. And I tried really, really, really hard. I hardly ever DNF books, but this was really big, and it was just so slow, and it was about to put me in a reading slump. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll just come back to it. I don't think I'm going to come back to it. I just didn't, unfortunately, enjoy it. And so that was a DNF. Next, I read another disappointing read, and that was Lost in the Garden by Adam S. Leslie. I picked this up as part of the Waterstones book club that I'm a part of, and I did not like it. So in this world, growing up, children always hear, you know, your usual cautionary tales like don't talk to strangers, don't go out at night, don't touch the power lines, and most important of all, do not go to Almonby. Everyone that kind of goes to Almonby just never returns, and we follow these three female characters who end up going to Almonby. So there's that. But basically this world is kind of inhabited by corporeal and oftentimes violent ghosts who end up taking out their frustrations on live people. And also, for whatever reason, the only people remaining in this world are either the really old or the really young. So you've got a lot of like, you know, up to 20-ish years old, and then you've got a big gap, like no more middle-aged, and then you've got the elderly for whatever reason, unknown. But yeah, in this book we follow Heather, Rachel and Antonia. Heather is kind of like the main protagonist of the story. Rachel and Antonia kind of supporting her in her feat to find her boyfriend, who ended up going to Almonby and never came back. And yeah, I mean, if a book could like embody the what the hell have I just read sentiment, this is it. Like, I can't even explain this book to you. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the purpose of it was. I don't know why this was written. Actually, is that nice? It probably isn't. But the one thing I hated the most with this book was Heather. Like, she is such a pick-me, like manic pixie dream girl. I understand being chaotic, but this girl was just so annoying. I don't know if you guys have seen, there's that girl who does like skits on TikTok and Instagram of being like the tiniest girl in the world, or like I'm just not like other girls. Literally, that's what Heather was giving the entire time. I was like, please, I don't care, can a ghost just dispatch you? Because I don't care anymore, and I still don't care. Nothing was explained. I don't know the purpose of the story. The twist at the end, I was like, okay. Like, just I borderline hated this book. However, the writing was good, and I did quite like the midsummer like folk country style horror elements to it, so I did give it 2.5 stars because the writing was good, but the story itself was horrible. Hated it. Do not recommend. Next, I read a sequel. I actually read a bunch of sequels this month. Oh, sorry, I think we're kind of slowly moving from August into September, but in September I definitely read a bunch of sequels. But here we have Ascension by S.T. Gibson. This is the sequel to Evocation, which was... when did that come out? Last year maybe? Or the year before? I didn't end up getting the same edition because I got the first one from Fairy Loot, and then they haven't announced, you know, doing a special edition of the sequel, so I ended up ordering a special edition from Waterstones. So it is still special. It does have sprayed edges, but most importantly, obsessed. So I absolutely adore the trio of characters in this book. So in the first book we follow all three of them, but we predominantly follow David. David is a lawyer by day and like a psychic medium by night. He's also the descendant of like quite a powerful family, and so he's very well thought of in like the circle of like, you know, magic and medium people. However, he's also kind of cursed, and the devil has come to collect for a deal that was made much, much further back to his ancestors, and David unfortunately is the one that he's going to be collecting from. So he ends up in a bit of a panic and desperation, going back to his ex-boyfriend Reese to ask for help. Reese is also a powerful is he a magician or a medium as well? I don't know if he's a medium. I can't remember, but he like is able to call demons and stuff. However, Reese is now married to Mora. Mora is like a nature type witch, and there's a whole bit of tension around that relationship that is going on. So initially Mora and David don't like each other. Reese is kind of stuck in the middle, blah 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 blah. Loved the first book, was very much excited for the second book. In this book we follow Reese. I won't really give you too much away in terms of the storyline because it will spoil the first book, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it very much gave more insight into the character of Reese and like the elements that aren't necessarily like good. It's kind of like what made him descend into this unlikable character in some aspects, but also you end up resonating with him and understanding the reasons why. Like there's a lot going on. Not that it excuses anything, he does become very unlikable, but it definitely like gives him a whole other depth of character that you didn't really get in the first one as much because it was more focused on David. I also really liked the dynamic in the relationship. It is polyamorous, and it isn't something I've really seen that often in books, so I quite liked how that was explored, and also the way that the relationship between like David and Mora was, between Mora and Reese, and then obviously between Reese and David. I quite liked like all those aspects of it. S.T. Gibson, great writer. I love her style of writing. I'm very much looking forward to book 3, which is going to be from Mora's perspective, and it will tie up the trilogy. I've also read the novella, which is called Odd Spirits, which gives a little bit of an insight into how how Reese and Mora meet in the first place, and it's really cute and I loved it. So I love the series, and this was just a great continuation, and I do recommend it. Next, I read probably my most anticipated book of the year ever. I keep saying this about all books, but I had like 4 books that have been like the most anticipated of the year, but this was probably the top one. And that is none other than Catabasis by R.F. Kuang. I also went to see R.F. Kuang at an event while she was speaking about this, and I loved it. I love R.F. Kuang so much. She is just so cool. So this is the Fairy Loot edition. I did also pre-order the Waterstones edition back when it was first announced, probably like April 2024, thinking it was coming out August 2024 when it was actually coming out August this year. So imagine my surprise where I was like, okay, I've literally pre-ordered a book that's like a year and a half away, but worth it. I did end up giving that copy to my brother, and I kept this one because I loved the edges, I loved the end paper art. The cover as well is absolutely stunning, and yeah, I was just obsessed with this edition, so I kept it over the other one. So in this book we follow Alice. Alice has only ever really known academia, and she's currently in her PhD, and her whole life revolves around this PhD. So when her supervisor unexpectedly dies in a freak accident, she has no choice. She must travel to hell to rescue his soul so that he may write her a letter of recommendation that she can go onto the academic track for tenure, to work in academia. Now, a spanner in the works is that as she's getting prepared to travel to hell, her academic rival Peter ends up joining her and decides that he wants to come with her, and so he does. So I know I've seen a lot of like mixed reviews about this book, how it's like heavily academic. I definitely am not of the opinion that like if you didn't understand it it's because you're dumb. Absolutely not. I know some people that didn't like it who have done PhDs. Like, I don't think that is relevant in this situation. I personally really enjoyed it. I found myself looking up a lot of these like philosophical concepts that I had no idea about, and I felt like I was learning stuff at the same time. Unlike Babel, it doesn't have the footnotes that like explain things, but it definitely was heavy on like the academia and the philosophy, and we know now from interviews that R.F. Kuang has done, that's because this book is based on her husband, and he is currently doing a PhD, or is about to finish a PhD in philosophy. So a lot of the ideas that came from this came from him and his friends, and well, her mutual friends as well. So I actually really loved this book. Again, it was another 5-star read for me. I don't think I've given R.F. Kuang's book anything below a 5-star, and at this point I feel like I'm inevitably setting her up for failure eventually. But no, she's an amazing writer. I love her writing style. I love that the genre switch that she does is just so dramatic every time. So obviously she's done Poppy War, which is like grim dark fantasy. It's set in like an Asian inspired world during like the Opium War type setting. She's done Babel, which is dark academia. She's done this one, which is almost like a bit satirical, a bit dark academia, and then she did Yellowface, which was again kind of contemporary satire. But I really enjoyed it. I love how she's able to like move across different genres and just write such like unlikably likable characters, because again in this one I didn't necessarily like Alice, but I really resonated with her on certain aspects of things. I loved Peter as a character. I loved the exploration of like invisible disability within that. I also loved the exploration of like mental health, of the abuse of power within academia, and as someone whose partner did a PhD and I was exposed to kind of that element of it and the academic world through them, I found it really interesting to see that depicted in the story, because I feel like it's something that not necessarily everyone really knows about, like the dark side of it. And this is also set in a time when women weren't really allowed in academia. So I think actually the time that Alice as a character joins the college that she joins, in reality women were not allowed yet. I think they weren't allowed for like a couple of years yet. So there's also that aspect of it around the like gender inequalities within academia, and I thought that was just really interesting. The way that like hell was depicted in the story was also really cool. It was a little bit reminiscent of like Dante, because well, she said that's kind of one of the inspiration points. So that was cool. So you had like 8 courts of hell. They were all like focused on different things, and it was cool to like watch the characters travel through them and look at how those things impacted them. But also it wasn't like horrific in the way you would imagine hell to be. It was more like psychologically and emotionally damaging, rather than like, you know, you've got someone being flayed alive every day, or you've got someone burning, which was interesting. I quite liked it. I also loved how she kind of converged different mythology from across different cultures to create this like mishmash of hell, but picked out things that were like consistent across myths. So for example, you've got the river, you've got the different kind of courts and things like that, which I found really cool. So overall, I am definitely a lover of Catabasis. I know not everyone is, but I really enjoyed it and I would recommend it. Now, if you don't like philosophy, or if you're not heavy on kind of like the academic metaphors and world setting of academia, because this is more about like actually what it feels like to work in academia, then maybe this isn't the book for you, but that doesn't mean it's badly written, and I would recommend a try. Next book I read was actually an ARC, which I received from Bantam Books and the author Morgan Ryan, so thank you very much for this ARC. I did read this after it had been released, because I think it came out in July, but I didn't receive it until like August. So I did obviously read it after, and I did post an honest review of it. So it's kind of like set in the 1940s during World War II. We follow Lydia, who is our main character, who has become the protege of the Grand Mistress of the Royal Coven of Witches in Britain, and she never really expected to get that far. She was a bit of a nobody. Oh, sorry, my dog just jumped. Okay, just watching people out the window, that's fine. But yeah, so, and 3 years in, she's kind of become one of the top apprentices in terms of like the Witch Academy, and she becomes her second in command. The Grand Mistress decides to offer her support to Churchill to help defeat the Nazis. Then Lydia has to kind of go along with it and ends up being sent on a mission to retrieve the Grimorium Bellum, which is like this really powerful and deadly grimoire that, if it was to fall in the hands of the Nazis, would spell like the end of humanity as they know it. They would do horrific things with it, and so they're trying to get their hands on it before the Nazis do. Turns out there are enemies within the coven itself, so Lydia is not only having to kind of wrestle with the enemies that she meets along the way, but also ones that are internal to the coven that she grew up in. So it's quite interesting. I really liked the setting. Like I've said before, that like books set in World War One, World War Two aren't really usually my favourites, especially set in like Britain. I just read quite a lot. I had to do them at school for like English, and I didn't really, I don't know, it didn't vibe with me. Especially contemporary ones, I just found like a bit meh. However, this was like a new spin on it. It wasn't really something I had encountered before, so I quite enjoyed it. So in this book, obviously, you've got the witches supporting the war effort on Britain's side. However, there's also like internal politics that are explored, which is really interesting. And I did really like the characters as well. And there's an element of found family, which I have said time and time again is one of my favourite tropes. However, having said that, I wish there had been more world building. I think it relied a lot on people just like knowing our world and knowing World War II history, which, you know, I do know a relative amount, but it didn't really explain how witches were embedded in this world, or like how the Royal Coven came to be and how all that fit together, which just left it a little bit kind of confusing in some parts. So I did enjoy the writing. I thought the writing was good. I did enjoy the premise and the plot of the storyline and, you know, the interactions between characters, but I just wish there had been more world building. So I think for that reason I gave it 3.75 stars and not really higher. It's like the first proper arc I've ever received directly from a publisher, so I was super excited, and I'm very grateful, and I did enjoy it. I do recommend reading it, especially at this time of year, because October, witches go hand in hand. Next, I read a bunch of sequels. So in September, I made it my mission to get through some of the sequels I had in special edition that I had ended up pre-ordering, because I'd received the first book in like a sub box, and then I wanted to know how the story ended. So first one, we have one which was like a very anticipated read as well, and that is none other than Theory of Dreaming by Ava Reid. This is the sequel to A Theory in Drowning, which I read again, I think at some point last year, and absolutely loved. I loved the like way it's so gothic and, I don't know, atmospheric. It was just so good. So in the first book, we follow Effie. Effie has always been haunted of these like visions of the Fairy King, and she really struggles to differentiate between like reality and maybe hallucinations. So she takes a lot of medication to try and help. Whilst that medication helps to keep her visions at bay, she does wonder if there's any elements of truth to it, especially after reading a lot by her favourite author, who writes a lot of tales about Fairy King, his name being Mirrodin. So when his family, after he passes away, host a competition to try and find an architect, of which she is like one of the only female architects within the school. She applies and she ends up winning, which she's very excited about. She can't believe that the opportunity that she's received. However, things are quickly dampened by the fact that she's having to share this moment with none other than her kind of academic rival, but not really, but this really snobby like literature scholar called Preston, who is on a mission to prove that Murden is a fraud and that his writing is not his own. So obviously very opposite vibes in terms of what they feel towards the author. I really liked, as I said, the first book because it was so like gothic and atmospheric. It felt very eerie, and you know, the way that they described kind of those that in between reality and fantasy, it was really like jarring at times in a good way, and this did so too. This book definitely focused more on the relationship between Preston and Effie, and more so on Preston's own kind of inner demons, let's say. And I really did like it because we didn't get a lot of Preston in terms of character development in the first book, but we did get a lot of it a lot of him in this one, which was really interesting to kind of get that other aspect of the story. I would say this one is definitely more like character focused, more emotional than the first, and the plot itself, I don't know if I can really 100% tell you what the plot was, but I loved it. I love the writing. I love Ava Reid. I think I've enjoyed every book I've read of hers so far, and I will continue to enjoy them just because the way she writes is just something I like. I think I gave this one 4 stars, and it was a well-deserved 4 stars. Next, I read one of the prettiest books I own alongside the first one of the series, and that is The Rag Picker King by Cassandra Clare. Now, I started reading Cassandra Clare at some point last year and then just haven't continued. So I am also currently reading the Mortal Instruments series, but I'm not very far in. I think I've read the first 2 books and I need to continue. I need to hurry up and continue because I have the first 9 books of that series. So, but anyway, I read The Swordcatcher at some point last year and then pre-ordered this from Illumicrate to have a matching edition because it's just beautiful. Loved the end paper art, love the edges. The edges are the prettiest edges ever and so nicely matched the first books. But I loved the first book so much and I was really keen to get back into this world and continue the story. Now, I will caveat that it had been so long since I had read the first one that when I first started reading this one I was like, huh, what? So I did have to have a little quick recap of book 1 before I then continued into this book. But once I had picked it all up again, it was just like I had never left that world and I was just like deep in it, loved it, ended up giving this 5 stars. It was just, oh, it was, you know, so much more emotion in this book. There was a lot more character development in terms of their relationships between each other, the plots, the plot twists. Oh my goodness, I couldn't put it down. I literally was like reading it physically, reading it on ebook. I was also listening to it in the car when I was driving places. I just could not stop. I had to at all times have this book on me in some way, and I did. And I love this series. I know that now without doubt that I will love the series forever and always. Well, unless like the next book is terrible, but I really hope that isn't the case. And definitely this ends on like quite the cliffhanger, which the first one did too. So like, what are you doing to me, Cassandra Clare? Of course I'm going to keep buying your books. Like, come on. But also write them. Please write them. I am so invested in these characters to the point where like when things were happening, I was literally holding my breath, not realizing that I'd stopped breathing. And then I was like, why am I feeling dizzy? And it was because of that. Because I just needed to like, I needed them to be okay. I needed them to be okay. And they're not always necessarily okay, which, you know, breaks my heart. And that's fine. I'm, you know, a bit masochist like that. I like to be put through turmoil and emotional heartbreak by books because I don't know, it's just something I enjoy in a weird sense. But I really loved this series. I cannot wait for book 3. Like the way that this ended, I am unwell. I need to know now what happens next, and I need it to come out soon so I haven't completely forgotten by the time it comes out again. Actually, by that point I'll probably just reread both. Next I had another sequel, which is the second in a duology, so this tied up the series, and this is The Blood Orchid by Kylie Lee Baker. This is a sequel to The Scarlet Alchemist, which again I read at some point last year I think, and it came as part of Fairy Loot, so I did pre-order this one to have a matching edition for the second book, and it's so pretty, but also it's got the old school like covers that Fairy Loot used to do, and I love it. But yeah, and the end papers are so cute. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. So the first book did end up on quite a big cliffhanger with our characters going off on basically a new adventure, so we kind of pick up where that leaves off and we get on with it. Again, this was one that I'd like, at first I had kind of forgotten what had happened in the first one and who all the characters were, but very quickly picked it back up. I feel like I need to not read series until all the books are out, but also I get FOMO and I need to know, and what if I see spoilers, you know? Anyway, we digress. So I really enjoyed this. I won't go too much into detail about what this book covers because it will be massive spoiler for the first one. But it's a world centered around alchemy. I love alchemy, I've said this before. I love Full Metal Alchemist, and this was like an Asian version of Full Metal Alchemist. Like, it was so interesting, set in kind of like an Asian inspired historical world, whereby our main character has the power to bring people back to life, but it's not necessarily a power that is very much accepted within society. So she's having to do that kind of undercover, but she also wants to become a royal alchemist. So in the first book, she ends up going through like trials and the, I don't know, acceptance process of becoming a royal alchemist. However, then there's like a bunch of plot twists. There's a lot of like political stuff happening, characters being horrible to one another, deaths and stuff, and that's kind of that's what happens. This is the second book. It does tie it up really nicely. The ending is satisfying, which I can't always say for books, but this one is. I think I gave it 3 stars. It is a little bit YA for me, but I did still really enjoy it, and I'm glad to have matching editions. I really liked it. And then the last sequel I read was none other than The God and the The God and the Guisin by Sophie Kim. Now, this again is a sequel to The God and the Gumiho, which I read at some point last year as well. Again, another one from Fairy Loot. Again, another pre-order because I wanted to have matching editions. This end paper art, please and thank you. I love them so much. But anyway, absolutely adored the first book. We follow our trickster god, who is essentially trying to track down this murderer. We also follow our Gumiho, who ends up being brought into the investigation because she ends up being a witness to something in the first book. And she is actually also a very notorious Gumiho. Gumiho is like this spirit fox with 9 tails that eat the hearts or livers of humans. I can't remember, I think it's livers actually. So she is almost like a serial killer in the past, but has reformed some way. And I think that he's actually also still looking for her, not knowing it's her. So there's that element of it, and this one follows on from the ending of the first book, but there's also a time jump. So the first book was kind of set in the 90s and this is set in like now age, and the ending of the first one was heartbreaking. Like, it destroyed me, and I needed to be back with these characters. Now you are kind of back with them, but in a different way, and I don't know how I felt about that, but I really enjoyed the journey. I really enjoyed the writing. I loved the premise. This is all set on a cruise ship. It's very much like another murder mystery type vibe, but just the characters are so fun. I love this world, and I don't know if there's going to be more in this series. I low-key hope so, because I don't want to like for this to be the last time I meet them. But yeah, I liked it. I recommend it if you're wanting like a fun murder mystery fantasy read. This is definitely up your street, especially if you love K-dramas. This is very K-drama coded, and I will not apologize for that. It's so good. It really reminded me of a mix between Goblin and The Tale of the Nine-Tailed, especially because I'm pretty sure this character is like 100% based on him, the guy from The Tale of the Nine-Tailed. But even though he's not a Gumiho, she is. But anyway, yeah, so I don't really want to give too much away. I feel like I've already given spoilers, in which case I'm really sorry. But yeah. Oh god, ow. I really did enjoy this. I really like Sophie Kim's writing, and I do hope there'll be another one because I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read A Dance of Lies by, I don't even remember who, Brittany Arena. I don't have the copy anymore because, again, it's one of the ones I sold. I received it as part of Fairy Loot, or maybe a Lumicrate, I can't remember. One of the subs. I didn't enjoy it enough to keep a special edition, especially because I'm running out of space. And I ended up selling it on Vinted, or eBay, I can't remember, one of the two. But this essentially follows Vasily. Vasily was previously a beautiful dancer. She was known in King Gazillion court as the jewel of the king, because he coveted her and, like, you know, showed her off, etc. However, at some point he decides to betray her and puts her in prison for a murder she did not commit after framing her. So now it's been 2 years. She's been rotting away in prison. She's got residual aches and pains from that have kind of like disabled her, and for whatever reason King Gillian decides that now she's gonna help him continue whatever he's been plotting for the past few years. So he brings her out of prison, and she is only to be free if he helps her spy on his brother's court. So she has no choice really, because it's either continue to rot in prison or not. So she decides to become his spy. You know, of the things that he keeps asking her to do, makes Vasily wonder how much she's actually truly willing to do to be able to be free, because some of the things are horrible and questionable at best. So this whole thing, honestly, I'm really struggling to remember what happened in this book because I didn't care, to put it bluntly. I think I gave it 2.5, 3 stars. The writing was okay. I didn't care for any of the characters. I thought the way that like disability was represented was actually a bit irritating, because she was supposedly like really broken, unable to dance anymore, but then randomly throughout the book was able to like dance the most complicated dances with the addition of some flour. But I will say that the last few chapters did go off and has kind of piqued my interest into how the story continues. Now, whether or not I end up prioritizing this to read the continuation of this series, given the amount of series I currently have on the go that I'm actually loving, I don't know. But it did make me want to know what happened next. However, overall, I felt the story was very superficial. The characters weren't very well developed. The world building was minimal, so I didn't really understand the reasoning for some of the actions because I didn't really understand the context that they were set in. I will say, actually, though, that King Ilian is a really good villain. Like, he's probably one of the more fleshed out characters. I say fleshed out because you don't really get to see his point of view or exactly what made him be like that, but I did like him as a villain in that he was highly unlikable. However, absolutely hated the insta-love, insta-lust going on between our main character and a couple of different characters. I hated the weird random love triangle that just didn't need to be there. And other than that, I didn't really enjoy it. That's all I can really say. As I said, I think I gave it 2.5, 3 stars. Purely because the writing was okay and the political intrigue was somewhat intriguing. Next, I read another book club book, which was The Book of Dust Part 1, and that is La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman. This is a prequel to his Dark Materials. So this is set when Lyra is a baby, and it follows kind of some of the background story that took place prior to the events in his Dark Materials. Now, if you haven't read his Dark Materials, I feel like this book would be quite confusing. I think there's a lot of reliance on knowing those characters, knowing kind of some of the lore from his Dark Materials to be able to understand this one. So having said that, even though this is a prequel, if you haven't read any of them yet, I would start with his Dark Materials, the trilogy, then read this, and then the second book of this one is then set after his Dark Materials, and the third one of this is recently, or is due to come out very shortly, which again is set after. So in terms of reading order, I would definitely do his Dark Materials trilogy first and then this trilogy, even if this is set beforehand, because it gives like background context and it's really good to be back in that world if you already know it. But I feel like if you read this without having read that, it would be confusing, because you'd be like, who are these people? What does this mean? What's a demon? What? But anyway, this book is very heavily influenced by like the impacts and the actions taken by the Roman Catholic Church, and that's kind of explored in his Dark Materials and again is very evident in this book. However, I did think that this one was a little less religious focused and more character focused, and I did really like being back with some of the characters that were in the original trilogy. I feel like it just gave them like more depth that you didn't necessarily get in that first trilogy. I also felt like that first trilogy, whilst it isn't told in first person, it is very focused through the eyes of Lyra, who is a 12-year-old child. And so you get almost like a different perspective. This one is through the eyes of another character, again not in first person, but it is through the eyes of a character called Malcolm, who is older and doesn't know the world in the way that Lyra does. So it's just a completely different experience, I think. But yeah, it was confusing at points. I won't say it wasn't, but I did like it overall, and I think I will be continuing with this series at some point once the last book is released, because I want to just like maybe binge it. But I think I gave this one 3.5 stars. Next, I read another really anticipated book, and that is none other than Alchemized by Selling You. I am going to be meeting Selling You at the end of this month, and I literally cannot wait. I am so excited. So for those of you who don't know, this is again based on Romani fanfic. It is a completely reworked version of Manacled, which I read last year, bound my own copy, absolutely adored, broke me in every way. And this is even better because it's in a different world, it's in a different magic system. It is completely its own thing. Again, it is set in alchemy land. Love alchemy, we've said this before. And actually, having said that, even in Manacled, the way the characters were described, the way they behaved was completely different from like the original source material. So it really wasn't a stretch to make this entirely its own story. And if you haven't read Manacled, I do not recommend reading it. Just read this instead, because this has everything you could possibly want. The world building is really good. The magic system is really good. The way it explores war and like the atrocities within, the way it explores like trauma bonding, PTSD, mental health, like the sense of feeling expendable to people who are abusing your like good nature. It is so good. Like, it's done so well. It completely like broke me. If you want to know my in-depth thoughts, I will link down below the reading vlog I did for this book, because I did do a whole reading vlog on it. So I won't really go over too much in this video, but yes, there is a whole reading vlog. It does have some spoilers, however it is relatively high level and generic. It doesn't tend to spoil too much. But yeah, again, one of my favorite reads of the year. I gave it 5 stars. It is heartbreaking. It is not a dark romance. Please do not go into it thinking that this is dark romance. It is a dark fantasy. So there is a romance subplot, but that is not the focus of the book, and that is definitely not something to glorify. The way that they are with each other is very toxic. The relationship in general is toxic, but it works for this book given the surrounding context. I would say, I've seen some people say it's kind of like very trauma dumpy. I don't think it is. I think it's done quite tastefully and quite well, and the fact that it's set in a fantasy world aids that. I think it's like quite realistic of what would happen in that situation. And also I love the way it kind of explores the roles of like women during these type of situations, and the way that maybe they are utilized and also at the same time made to feel expendable. I said I wouldn't go into it too much, but anyway, loved this book. One of my favorite reads of the year. It was definitely worth the hype for me. I had been waiting for it for ages. This edition, whilst beautiful, is not my favorite. It's too bright. It doesn't go with the vibe I had in mind for Alchemized, but this is the edition I have, so here we go. I'm hoping they bring out like a special paperback in like a year's time, and I will just get that and annotate the hell out of it, because I am not ruining this one. But I do want to annotate it. I love the story, I love the passages, I love everything about this book, and I can't wait to meet Selling You because they're awesome. And then we're nearly at the end, I promise. I don't know how long I've been talking, but it feels like a lot because I also had lunch in between. But next book I read was The Floating World by Axie O. Axie O wrote one of my favorite like Korean mythology inspired tales, which was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. Really loved that book. I think I gave it 5 stars. This one I had high hopes for the same reason. Again, it's another like retelling of Korean mythology, this time focused on the Celestial Maidens, and it follows the character of Ren, who loves performing with her adoptive family. However, she knows that she's also got to keep her true self and true powers under wraps and secret, because there will be people looking for her if people were to know who she really was. She goes from village to village with her family, and they're like a traveling acrobat troupe. But when a demon attacks one of their latest visits and her uncles end up being severely injured, she ends up exhibiting those powers that she's tried so hard to keep secret, to the point where her life is now in danger. But at the same time, she's wanting to save the life of her uncle, so she ends up traveling back to the place that she came from to try and find a cure for his illness. At the same time, she bumps into a bounty hunter who doesn't realize that she's the girl he's looking for, and together they set off on this journey. And it's really cute. It's really cute. I liked it. Again, it wasn't like, definitely wasn't as good as The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, because that had a lot of like found family, which I absolutely adored. But this one was more kind of like about the two characters. It did have a 3 POV story, so you had the main female character, the main male character, and then another male character. And I did like how the stories kind of like converged and joined up, especially with like flashbacks and things like that. But overall, it wasn't as good, but still good. I think I gave it 3.75. Yes, 3.75 stars, which is not bad at all. I just really like Korean mythology, and also I just love the way Axio writes it. It's very like YA, it's very wholesome, it's very cute, and also this edition is adorable. Like, can we just, so cute. So cute. And then I did start another arc in September, but I finished it in October, so I will give a full review of that in October, also because it's due to come out on October 31st. I think that will be a good time to kind of do the recap of that, and that is Starfallen by Fern Cole. And again, thank you so much for the arc. That brings us to the end of this incredibly long video. I don't think I'm gonna leave it this long again to do a wrap up, because my voice hurts. Also, I'd forgotten what happened in half the books because my memory is that of a goldfish. However, please let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were down below. I really want to know. I want to know if you liked it, if you hated it. What did you think? If you enjoyed this video, please do pop a like. If you would like to see more, please subscribe, and see you soon.